To cloud?
Okay. My job at SANS is the head of innovation, which I'm happy to say is the funnest job I've ever had. And basically what that job is finding out ways to use technology to enhance cybersecurity, to enhance product development, to make student experience better, to make our business run better, all of those kinds of things. And unsurprisingly, for the last 3 or 4 years, it has very much focused on the use of AI, and in the last 3 years, specifically generative AI, to do that job. There are many, many, many different ways that generative AI has helped us. We've been doing this for a minute. About 2 years ago, I also got drafted to chair an AI policy and security committee, as well as an AI product committee, which means everybody who has any questions or wants to do anything crazy or whatever they want to do, they bother me about it. A spin-off of that is I actually wrote a course called AIS 247, which is about a 3-hour course on AI security essentials, which is sort of the mothership for what I'm going to talk about today. So before I start talking more about the actual course, I want to just make sure that I'm setting the stage here for a second. So this is not a technical conversation. This is not an AI software development security course. This is really about securing the everyday use of generative AI at large organizations and small organizations and at home and at work and everywhere that we're interacting with LLMs. Basically, what do we need to do to mitigate the common risks that are there? So by way of an agenda, I got to click on the presentation. Oh, here we go with this. Introduction, a little bit about demystifying generative artificial intelligence. What I mean by that is, what do we need to know about large language models and AI that informs safe use and risk management and things like that. We're going to talk about prompt engineering for about 5 minutes. I'm just going to give a brief overview of that. I'm sure that's not a new topic to many of you, but it is a very important topic. Talk for a few minutes about bad actors. Like, what are we seeing in cyber that is directly related to generative AI? What are they doing? What can we do about it? We're then going to cover top end user or AI user risks. How many people in this room are using generative AI, ChatGPT, Google Gemini? Like, I assume 99%, except for maybe Harvey. No, he's using it. Harvey's our head of sales, so who knows what he's up to. We are then going to talk about some organizational policies, just for a few minutes, about what AI policies are, what they should be. If at your organization or some future organization, you want to know what makes a good policy, that's where that's covered. And then we'll move into some questions at the end. Okay, or if anybody wants to ask a question during, there are a lot of people here, so this could take a long time if we get too deeply in it, but if you have a good question, shout it out and I'll give you those bags and not his bag. Okay, so why generative AI and why now? And this seems like a very obvious question, but mostly there's just a lot of activity around Gen AI. It's been just echoing down from every news channel and social media channel and all that stuff. It's all over the place. The thing I want to focus on, especially in the business world and in the real world, the main gain from generative AI is actually about productivity. Sure, it's magic and it's neat and it can come up with great recipes for chocolate chip cookies, but really it's about productivity. And sort of, this is like the study after study has shown some version of this story where if you're doing this job, you can get this percentage increase in productivity. It might all be a little bit of BS, honestly. I don't know that I love numbers that try to quantify something so complex. But when you start floating around numbers, I've been in technology for about 35 years. Most of that time, we've been trying to figure out how to increase productivity by using technology some way, shape, or fashion. That's in many ways why it exists. We've been chasing numbers like 2% or 3% or 5%. I mean, good God, in 1988, if you could come up with a computer technology that increased productivity by 20%, you would have been an absolute hero. And now we have numbers like 126% being put up. We have numbers across every industry, we have numbers across every job role that look like this is a massive productivity boom. And if you've used this long enough, you know that this may not be right, but it certainly is not wrong. There are a lot of gains to be made in the Gen AI game right now. I could give you a quick example. So SANS courses are pretty long. We teach for 6 days in a classroom. When we take that course and we put it in an online fashion, because all our courses exist in both, we put up the videos and the slides and all that stuff, and one of the activities that we have to do is to create the VTT, or the closed captioning track, at the bottom of the video, which seems like a pretty boring thing. This is not a super sexy AI example. It is a really sexy business example. So in the olden days, for the last 20 years, we've been taking that course material, say 25, 30 hours of course material, and shipping it off to a subcontractor who creates the VTT track and ships it back. It takes 5 weeks to do it that way. It costs $5,000 or $6,000 a course to do it that way. And when it comes back, because we're a really technical content provider, we had error rates of about 1 error in 100 words. Okay, 5 weeks, $5,000, $6,000, 1 error in 100 words. We started 2.5 years ago to create a process that used Gen AI tools, specifically contextually aware transcription, which basically not only uses utterances and sounds to transcribe, but it also takes the transcription and it supervises it using Gen AI to make sure that what's coming out the other side makes sense. At the end of that process, we're now transcribing in 5 minutes for $35 a course with an error rate of about 1 word in 10,000. Well, think about that. Like, it's not just better, it's not just faster, it's not just cheaper, it's at least an order of magnitude of those 3 things. And this is for some dopey. Now, we have 90 courses, we update them 4 times a year. So it actually adds up. It's millions of dollars kind of a cost savings to us. But that's just an example of how such a interesting new technology can change those business processes. And that's what's got people excited, right? We all want to do things better, faster, and cheaper, and this is finally a tool that seems to be able to do that in many cases. It is driving investment. I can tell you that. I spend a lot of time talking to a lot of companies, and every one of them has some kind of an AI initiative going on. So if you're in security, you want to go into AI security, you're going to have a busy couple of years. If you go and talk to investors, they are only investing in companies that have something going on, at least in the technology space, around generative AI. It is all the buzz. So that's why we're talking about AI. We're going to jump in here and talk for a little bit about, here we go, sorry, my bad. A little bit about its history and what it is under the hood, again, in the way that it informs risk. We're going to start with talking about AI models. First thing I'm going to talk about is data science, which we think of as this sort of mothership that encompasses this whole kit and caboodle. Data science is not a new thing. Data science has been around for a long, long, long time. A good example of what I mean by data science is in 1853, a guy by the name of John Snow sorted out the phenomena of cholera, which was killing lots of people in London, by using data science. So what I mean that is, he looked at where everybody lived, the coordinates, the geospatial coordinates, he looked at where they were getting sick, and he determined that wells in London at certain altitudes were the problem. He didn't use a microscope, he didn't use, I don't even know if they had microscopes, yeah, biologists, I don't know. He didn't use medical science, he used data science, numbers to figure out how to answer that problem. So that's data science, not new. Next, we have, I'm sorry about this, it's gonna be a thing. We have good old-fashioned AI, which of course wasn't called good old-fashioned AI when we made it. This is in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. When I was in high school, I got to ride a school bus. I don't know if people still do that. For about an hour to get to school. I was a country boy. And on the bus, we had little football games. I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember the football games that had a little red LED that you tried to get across the finish line or the touchdown. But those were actually primitive AIs. They had simple structured rule sets. They had simple algorithms that made predictions, and they made simple output. That kind of AI has been around a long time. It's still around. That's still in use in many different cases. tax software, all kinds of things, just simple, good old-fashioned AI. That then evolved by injecting data that's in real time into those same systems. Real-time data plus decision-making. This is actually kind of like when stuff got interesting because we could have the AI evolve, if you will, and I don't mean in a scary way. I mean, it learned and made better decisions based on the data that it got in real time. Netflix recommendations is a real-time AI. As an example, you finish a movie, it tells you what to watch next so that you never have to get off your couch. And it's doing it all with real-time data. Next we have ready to pay Mr. Harvey to come up here and click on that blue box every time it shows up. We have deep learning. Now, deep learning didn't do anything more about the data. What it did is it added more complex neural networks that could make much more and better decisions about how to process that data. Before you do, are you logged in as Zoom on here? Because if you log into your account with Zoom on there, is it not going to take this one off? Probably not. Okay. Probably. I think it will, but we can try it. Don't worry about it. I can keep pressing the green box. So these deep learning models gave us the ability to do things like, I don't know, self-driving cars. Deep learning with deeper neural networks. Like, I don't know, anybody been to San Francisco and seen the Waymos driving around? You know, like it is, to me, somehow frightening. I know how this stuff works. I know they're actually really good. They have great safety records. It is freaky to see a taxi whipping down the road with nobody in it. I'm from Michigan, so it's extra scary. So that's deep learning. The next thing we'll talk about is large language models. We're going to talk about these a lot more than just right now, but these are simply models that interact with us using human language. They're built out of the same bricks, right? But they also have the effect of democratizing artificial intelligence. When I first started doing AI, especially at SANS, we were talking to data scientists. They were in labs. We were building node graphs. We were trying to train models. It was a whole wonky-wacky science that only certain types of people messed with. Now everybody messes with it. It's ubiquitous, democratized. It's easy to get at. It's easy to use, and it's free and powerful. So everybody's using it all the time, it would seem. So that's where LLMs came in, and that really changed how we interact with these models. And next we talk about generative AI, which simply is using them to create stuff. Typically create stuff that has been very difficult to create with computers at scale the way we can now. That's Gen AI. I'm going to move now into a little bit of how it works and what it is. Remember, if you have a question, shout it out. I realize we don't have a lot of question-worthy things going on yet, but we might hear it in a second. The first thing I'd like to talk about is some of the terms we use to describe LLMs. Prompt, we're all probably pretty solid on what is a prompt. That is the instruction that we're giving the artificial intelligence. Not really an instruction, we'll get there in a second, but that's what it is. And then we talk about tokens, and I'm going to lie to you a minute here, but trust me, it doesn't matter that I'm going to lie. Tokens are essentially words to the AI. It needs to think in terms of tokens, because that's how everything that it does works. And essentially, a way to think about that is every time you take a sentence or a paragraph, it breaks it into tokens that are roughly a word, a punctuation mark, a space, a number, something like that. Okay, so we have prompts, tokens, and temperature, which I'm going to cover in a second. I'm just going to ignore that for a minute. Okay, so the other two components I want to talk about in large language models are, number one, the large language model. And these things are large, not kind of large. The big large language models, the Geminis and the Claudes and those big language models are enormous. 1.74 trillion tokens in ChatGPT 4. So I say words, that's a lie. Okay, there aren't 1.74 trillion different words. Not if you count every language ever conceived of, spoken, written, Klingon, you name it, it is not even close to that number of words. What I mean is all the tokens and how they're connected to other tokens. The combinations of words that make up sentences, that make up cohesive or incohesive thought. how are they connected to each other, that's what makes up the large language model's magic. Sequences of tokens, and how they exist and how they're connected. That data is, by the way, basically the internet. And I mean that in a very inclusive sense. They filtered some stuff, but largely it's the internet unfiltered. If you're interested, ChatGPT 3, which I think some of you are old enough to remember, took about $4 million in electricity to build, electricity bills when they're building the model. ChatGPT 4.0, the most common model in the world right now, $100 million in electricity. In fact, electricity, not servers, not racks, not data centers, not people, power. Most experts agree today that the single largest limiting factor to generating the next gen AI, LLM, is the lack of electrical energy on the power grid to do it. One second, okay, get right there. In fact, our friends at Microsoft have recently contracted 3 Mile Island to spin up a reactor core, and if you're old and like I am, that's a pretty scary thought. A whole reactor core just to power a data center to train their next gen LLMs. Yes, sir?
Oh, yes. So with LLMs being the new wave for the 2025 market, how is that going to impact AI aesthetics?
AI?
Aesthetics.
I don't understand the question.
That's basically teaching AI human behavioral characteristics.
I'm still not following you. Just hit me after the talk,
Yeah.
and we can catch up. Okay, so the other half of what makes up an LLM is a giant probability calculator. And I mean that actually fairly literally, a probability calculator. In fact, the way LLMs work is they play this sort of computational game of fill in the blank. And what I mean by that is if I said twinkle, twinkle, little star, somebody say star? And I said, whoever said star, why do you say star when I say twinkle, twinkle, little blank? The answer is usually something like, well, I bet since I was a child, I heard that. I heard it over and over again. That is the most, by far, likely thing that fills in that blank is the word star. And that's actually exactly how LLMs work. They are looking through all of their data, all of their sequences of tokens, to find a probable token that follows the prior tokens that are in the prompt. And they just fill in the blank. It works like this. We start with a prompt. What color is the sky, for example? Believe it or not, this is not actually the internal systems of ChatGPT. So in case you're wondering, this is a total sort of representation of kind of how this works. So we take our prompt, what color is the sky, okay? And we break it into tokens and we process it and we pull back a list of likely tokens and probability numbers called weights, if you will, of which tokens are likely going to follow that. So we've got this in a pretty linear problem. What color is the sky? Well, 0.94 or 94% probability that the word that should follow that is blue. A different probability, say 0.9 clear, so on and such forth. In this case, what we're going to do is we're simply going to select blue because it's got the most probability, and we're going to return it as the answer. There's our prompt, there's the probability calculator, and this is what it returns to the user, blue. So you could ask yourself, well, what happens when I ask a complicated question? That's a pretty easy one. I could look that up in a regular database. Well, if I prompt it with, why is it blue? More complicated question? More complicated algorithm? No. What we're going to do is we're going to take the same exact logic up here, why is it blue? We're going to pull back a list of tokens with probabilities. The next most probable token is the word the, okay? Now we're going to do something really tricky. We're going to take that token and we're going to put it on the end of the original prompt. We're going to do it again. Okay, I'm going to submit it to the LLM again. It's going to return another list of tokens. In this case, it's going to return the word sky. That's the next most probable token. It's going to take sky, put it on the end of the prompt, and submit it again. And it's just going to keep doing this over and over again until it builds up an answer. Same probability calculation is happening, prompt, expand, prompt, expand. I mentioned temperature before, and I'm going to talk about that for just a second because it's actually one of the things that makes LLMs kind of cool. Temperature can be thought of as a factor that influences a randomness of which of these tokens we actually return. We've been returning the most probable token in these examples. But what if I said take the top 5 tokens and give you a random of those tokens? They're still probably going to make some kind of sense, but it's also going to feel a little more creative, a little bit more, kind of flexible in how it answers. We don't want the same answer every time. We want it to be a little more chaotic than that. So temperature, like in ChatGPT, rolls from 0 to 2. 0 means be super predictable. Its default is 0.8. That's what we're pretty used to. You ask it the same thing over and over, you do not get the same answer, but you still get a plausible answer. You send it to 2, it randomizes too deep and too often. It brings back tokens that might not fit very well. Then it puts that token on the end and it does it again, and it doesn't fit very well. And then and again, and we end up getting an answer that doesn't fit, which is something we've all come to understand as a hallucination. Which, not in love with the word because it implies some kind of weird, it's a computer, it's a setting that's probably wrong, or a data pool that's too shallow, but all it really is a series of tokens that don't quite fit the initial prompt. So in a nutshell, when we get done, we end up with some answer like the sky appears blue to the human eye because of a phenomenon called Rayleigh scattering, right? Like and on and on and on. We get a very credible answer that feels actually to me, to this day, and I've been using this for a long time, super magical. But it isn't. It isn't magic. It also isn't thinking. It isn't ethical or unethical. It isn't making judgments. It is using statistics to assemble the next token based on tokens from the internet. That is what it is doing. That is amazing and powerful, and there are reasons that's great, and there's reasons there's risk in that. Yes?
At what point does the prompt say, hey, that's enough, and stop, go on?
So I'm simplifying how this works. There are all kinds of algorithms that determine sentence structure in ways that this ends up happening to complete the request. I'm not going to get into that today. I can give you a YouTube video that'll explain it all day long. But it absolutely is, it's going to go until it hits a flag and then it's going to say that it's done.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If I interact with this answer, like the answer generated, if I say that rephrase the second paragraph, how is that working? Because that is not a generic question, like, what is sky or why is it blue? I'm asking it to re-edit just the second paragraph of this exact answer. So how does prompt engineer or like the prompt work in that case?
So always when you're communicating with these AIs in these chat environments, everything that you used to have in the chat, the history, is submitted back to the LLM before your next prompt. So like if you put down here, after all this, explain your answer, it's going to start with what color is the sky? The sky is blue. Why is it blue? This long answer, then your next prompt, and it's going to start assembling tokens from there. That's how it. So all of these conversational histories are part of the submission for the next answer and the next answer, until you hit a limit of how many tokens the AI can think about at one time, aka the context window, which is variable depending on model, but that's what a context window is how many tokens can it consider before it can't consider anymore. Yes?
When we will train our business data with a local deployment of AI, so those tokens, right, we are purchasing tokens from Microsoft, for example, right? So how does this decides that how many tokens will be given to which resource. Do you know what?
I don't follow what you mean by which resource.
Like, I might have 10 applications, right? And I want to train my organization's data on it, which will be internal use only. But I want certain applications, to be, for example, Confluence, right? I want it to use my Confluence data first, right? And if it is not there, then I want it to go to some other system to look for the information. How does this tokenization will give the priority to certain?
It actually doesn't, right? Like when you, depending on what you're doing, and we do this a lot, like I don't know how many people have heard of Ray. That's a way to populate data into this conversation from some source of data that I have. And it really has to do with feeding the data in and giving it a prompt saying, pay attention only to this data and answer my question. We got one more question up here at the top.
So as it's pulling in data, you said it's pulling it from the internet. So, I know just from talking to people out there, right? People are just entering data in for AI to read, right? So how do we determine like what is actually false or what's real? Like how quickly are they able to enter data, right? Enter data and change what it actually reads?
So, two comments. One, ChatGPT is frozen. It stopped learning on November 30th, 2023, ChatGPT 4. It's not learning right now. You can seed it with data. It can search the web and do stuff like that, but the actual LLM data is what it is. It's chock full of things that aren't true, and there's no way to tell. That's the simple fact. There are ways that you could tell if what it's telling you are right, but that's not to say you cannot look at its data and tell if the data that it's using to answer you is true or false. We're actually going to cover that in just a minute. I'm going to press on. We're going to talk about prompt engineering. We're entering this prompt, what color is the sky, whatever that prompt is. And the thing I can tell you about prompts is the best chance that you have to get an answer that's good is to write a good prompt. Write a bad prompt, you're probably going to get a bad answer. Writing prompts is actually a skill. And by the way, there's lots of tools that are emerging on how that you put in this and it gives you a better prompt, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about writing good prompts yourself, good responses from an AI. When I say good, I mean two things, really. I mean the right output. I'd like it to be correct, timely, accurate, so on and so forth. But usually we want this output in a certain kind of a format or a certain tone or in a certain way. I could say it doesn't matter if you're asking for a chocolate chip cookie recipe, because it just gives you a recipe. Unless you want it in grams instead of ounces, or you want it in cups instead of liters, then I need to tell it that. That formatting of how that prompt comes out, how that data comes back out rather, is often more energy than actually getting the right answer out. Especially if you're trying to do something like, I don't know, transcribe a course and you want the answer to come out and be checked a certain way every time. Meaning, if there's a process that computers are running that's using AI, now you're using this sort of chaos machine that is the AI, the LLM. It's nice that that data can come back out and be in that process in a way that I can continue to have the conversation computationally. And I'll give you a good example of how that is. So, I'm going to start with write me an article about starfish. Okay, generic prompt. It's going to write an article about starfish. There it is, introduction, anatomy and physical features, so on and such forth. Okay? Doesn't matter whether this is right or not, it's just an example. I'm going to change one word in my prompt. Write me a scientific article about starfish. One word in the prompt, and I get a completely different kind of article. Okay, we've got abstracts, we've got Latin, clearly a scientific article. We've got biology and physiology, anatomy. It's a much more scientific-y article. But let's say I love this article. It's exactly what I wanted. I'm going to do something that we do, another thing at SANS all the time, and that is write a quiz. We write a lot of quizzes because we have a lot of content. We're starting to write a lot. We have been writing a lot, not starting. We have been writing a lot of these quizzes using AI by doing some version of write me a quiz about this article. Okay? When I do this, it writes me a quiz about the article. We got multiple choice, we got some distractors, we got some answers, things like that. Now, this looks great at first, But one thing I can tell you too, just FYI, might look perfect right now, and I might run that same prompt, and it might give me true and false questions, or fill in the blank. I have not given it enough information to be predictable, even if it is correct. I'm going to modify it a little, and I'm going to say something like, write me a 5-question multiple choice quiz, indicate the correct answer, and give me feedback for both correct and incorrect answers. I'm adding specificity and reducing its, AIs always do something. They're always going to do something. They're going to do their best, I could say, not that they have intentionality. But in this case, I'm taking away some of its creativity, and now we have, indeed, a correct answer C, correct answer C. We have feedback for both correct and incorrect answers. I'm getting it dialed in. I'm going to take one more whack at it, and this time I'm going to say, write me a 5-question multiple choice quiz, indicate the correct answer with a star by the option letter. Give me feedback, correct, incorrect, and use 1 correct and 2 distractors, which is instructional design speak for wrong answers. Okay, I'm really limiting its creativity this time, and now I have exactly that. They're generally fairly obedient, if that's a thing, and we now have pretty much exactly what I wanted. I got stars by my option letters and so on and such forth. This iterative prompt engineering is actually how this is done by most people who do it. There are, as I said, many people that would say, oh, I could write that prompt right away. Good for you. I've been doing this for a long time. I still can't. There are tools now that you can use to help develop prompts. They're okay. Maybe they're great. In reality, we end up with prompts that look something like this. This is not here to terrify anyone, but if you want consistency and you want correctness, and when I say write me a question, I mean literally match the tenses, use parallel structures. What makes that question good? And the way this actually got developed is we write a bunch of questions, we look at the questions, we go talk to a subject matter expert, they look at the question and go, these are crap. We go back, we change the prompt to make them less crap. We run it again and again until we end up with these large prompts. A couple things that are cool here. 1, define what you mean by write a question. 2, give it examples of what you like and don't like. Don't ask questions about what color shoes the instructor was wearing. Ask questions about the starfish, things like that. Lastly, this business over here, we call this AI modeling. If you want the output a certain way, which again in a computational process you probably do, show it, don't tell it. Give it an exact example of how you want that data to come back, and it will do that very, very well. In fact, by far the best way to interact computationally with Gen AIs right now is using JSON. I don't know how many people here are programmers, but if you put data structures in JSON, and you say, hey, fill in this JSON data structure with the answers, every time, over and over again, super powerful way to do it. And in fact, just with this prompt, we end up with this kind of an answer 99.8% of the time. The format's right, the question's good, over and over again. This is something I can deal with a program, right? Like this is something I can parse in and load into my question banking software. And this is how we develop the kinds of prompts that we use to do this. Okay, several hands. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I've been using ChatGPT, and I always start by saying act as an expert.
Sure.
And then you didn't put it there. I'm wondering if that is already embedded into the ChatGPT at some point, and I don't need to do that anymore.
It is not, and that's called personification. And what her comment was is that when she starts to use ChatGPT, she says, you are a librarian, you are a nuclear physicist, you are whatever. Act accordingly, essentially. And that is powerful and it's super useful and you should absolutely do it. And there is no magic, it doesn't do that by itself. You could build GPTs and other gimmicky things to have it always be that, but that's a great tactic to get it to do that. In this case, I could say you are an instructional designer. That would put it in the mood to act that way, not for any other reason except how it influences that token sequencing. There's nothing else that's happening there, that's what it's doing. One more question?
Could you, hypothetically, ask it to personify an AI expert in the prompt itself to give you the best prompt for a particular problem?
actually do that. I don't personally think it always works that well. But yes, you can actually ask it to write prompts for you. You can also ask it, like, because a lot of times you develop these things like conversationally, and you're like, no, do this, no, do that. If you're building a prompt like this, go back up to the top and keep editing the same prompt. Don't keep adding stuff because you can't get back to where you left off. But you can also take a whole long conversation and say, write me a prompt that'll give me this next time, and it'll kind of work. All right, I'm gonna press on. So that's prompt engineering. I'm gonna move on to attackers using AI. You know, this is a super interesting thing. Before I get into it, let me ask you, like, who are the actors? Who are the bad actors that we're talking about who are using Gen AI to do stuff? Well, it turns out they're the same bad actors we've been dealing with for 30, 40, 30, 20 years. I don't know how long we've been dealing with them. They are individuals. We call them script kiddies. People who are just goofing around trying to see what they can get away with. They are, organized crime and essentially cyber gangs who are basically trying to take your money. And they are nation states who are trying to do all of the above, but they're also trying to influence the way we think about things. Okay, so the motivations. Missing some good content joining that late. Money, obviously. North Korea made $1 billion in cybercrime last year. Okay, that's a pretty good ROI when you've got a team of 100 people that make $1 billion. Leverage, politics, and ideology. I'll explain what some of these are in the next slide, but this is not new, right? Like, this is basically why cybersecurity, this is what we've been trying to defend against, especially this kind of stuff, for a long time. So, side note, this is not a work problem, and it's not a home problem, and it's not a, it's a wherever you have an internet-connected device in your hand problem, which means it's happening all the time. And it's not just happening in your email, it's happening in your, God forbid, TikTok, it's happening in your Instagram, it's happening in Facebook, it's happening basically in every place that somebody else has the ability to control what we see, read, hear, all of that stuff. It's happening in Google Maps when you're taking a trip to a restaurant. It's happening every ad suggestion that we see. It's all going on all the time. And most of it now, or a big chunk of it, is very AI powered. So, this is my deepfake danger slide. This is just an example. I got a few capability slides in here.
Hello, I'm Melinda, and I'm speaking to...
I'm gonna have to fix something. Hold on one second. We had this problem 1 minute ago.
Hello, I'm Melinda, and I'm speaking to you from my home as part of a talk on generative AI security essentials for the Triangle chapter of the Cloud Security Alliance. Actually, I'm an AI. Be careful. We are becoming more believable every day.
So Melinda's doing pretty well here. Her voice is pretty solid. Her video is credible. She takes 2 minutes for me to customize for every talk that I give. And she would certainly fool many people into thinking that she's real, especially when she's in a little box on Facebook. The main thing we like about Melinda is that she types whatever I say. For the forces of good or bad or evil, she doesn't care. And she could be anyone or anything. And these tools aren't $82 zillion. These are tools that you can find for free on the internet. Sign up with your Gmail account and start Melinda-ing.
Hi, this is Dan Hobian, and I'm sitting here in my office making a recording to see what happens when I try to swap the face out.
So this is a particularly interesting technology, face swapping, also free. Go to faceswap.com, put in your credentials, upload a video, grab Jeff Goldblum's face, or...
This isn't a question, but a comment. Man, I wish Jeff Goldblum was real. Thank you for your comment. I'm going to give that some meditative thought.
So that is gold blooming and de-gold blooming. and that's face swapping, which is super useful because you can put somebody else's face onto somebody else's body and control, an awful lot about what the person perceives when they're seeing that modified video. Also, like, super simple technology to use, like 12-year-olds can run this stuff. Yes, sir?
That's, sorry for this confusion earlier, that's what I was getting at, AI ethics. The good use of AI, how is that going to be implemented with large language models, making sure AI's proper.
So as of right now, while every AI company will say they care about ethics, it is one of the most difficult things to regulate with technology that there is. So they regulate it with policies, they regulate it with public relations, they regulate it with marketing. And like Anthropic, if you're familiar with Anthropic, Claude, lots of people like that, it actually does try to do some better locking down of its AI based on ethical decisions. As everybody knows, you can get around them, you can fool them, you can trick them. It's just not that effective. And it is a concern for sure. The last hack I'm going to show is this thing. And this is actually the one that scares me the most. This is a guy by the name of Steven Kalnowski. He works for me. He called me 15 minutes ago. I hung up on him because I'm standing up here. And you can do things like this now. Hey, Steven, I need to order the items we discussed. Can you shoot me $100 on Venmo? My Venmo ID is this isn't really Dan Venmo. Thanks. That is not me talking. And it's pretty much like me talking. And it is not me talking. And certainly if I left a voicemail for Steven that said something like that, I'm thinking he wouldn't think it was me talking, especially if I had a little background noise, maybe I'm driving in my car. That is, again, I think that would cost me $9 to make for my monthly subscription to whatever tool it was that I bought. And the sample that I needed, I did not walk into a studio and record a big script and do something for it to clone my voice. I fed it a YouTube video. So this is amazing and powerful and terrifying when it comes to validating identities. Which brings us to the 4 horsemen of the AI apocalypse. The first one is phishing, which phishing, not new, been around forever. The big thing with AI and phishing is how easy it is now. The days of, people in phishing factories getting grammar wrong and spelling things wrong, it almost feels like the cute old days of phishing at this point. We used to take whole teams of people working for nation states for months to spearfish one person. They'd pick a general or 2 generals, they'd get a room full of people, they'd research everything they could figure out. They'd look at their social media posts, their LinkedIn posts, their organizational structures, publications, all that stuff, come up with schemes and plans, generate phishing emails, time them, and get people, okay? Teams of people to get one person, how about one person getting whole teams, buildings full of people? By harvesting that data using generative AI, processing it, making incredible stories and connections, and suddenly we have very, very powerful phishing, spear phishing at scale. It's actually very scary, and it's happening all the time. Next, we have identity theft. We talked about deep fakes. How many of you have seen ChatGPT Operator? It's in the news. Basically gives ChatGPT a mouse and a keyboard and it can interact with web pages, right? The first demo I saw that thing, was it slicing through captions on the internet like they weren't even there, like a hot knife through butter. It's spinning the little things around so they're facing the right direction, it's picking stoplights, it's doing all that stuff over and over and over again. Well, it's a little scary considering that's the main technology that we've been using for 10 years to keep bots from going onto web pages and hammering on them. That is a dead technology. CAPTCHA's over. Exploitation and extortion. So one of my really good friends is Heather Mahalik, and she's a digital forensics expert, and she gives a talk about sextortion. Sextortion is the act of attaining or creating sensitive material and using it to extort, manipulate, whatever. It's a huge problem. The problem we're getting into now is face swapping and deep fakes and lots of unregulated web space that allows me to create material that's incredibly realistic, incredibly dangerous, damaging to individuals, It's being used to either get their money or get them to do something, change something. Get it on a news anchor, get them to change the news. Get it on a CEO, get them to change your corporate strategy. The scary thing, it doesn't matter if it's real or not. When you get your head around this, if somebody calls you and says, hey, I have a picture of you, da-da-da-da-da, you know it's fake, they know it's fake, but the reputational damage that it might do doesn't care that it's fake, right? And this is probably the most growing problem because of AI is that kind of extortion. And lastly, of course, disinformation and misinformation. You know, obviously there are whole fields in cybersecurity dedicated to validating information that is generated by computers. That's OSINT, super cool field of study, very hot. And this is done for obvious reasons, financial gain, ideological manipulation, things like that. Okay, so what can we do? What strategies can we employ to try to stop this craziness, okay? I wish I could tell you that there was a magic strategy, an AI-powered answer to this AI-generated problem, but there actually isn't. The answers that I'll show you are not that exciting, but very important. Education and awareness, and if you've worked in that space before, you've been around that space, these are training videos and posters and all kinds of things that just try to let people know this stuff is a thing. And in particular, these kinds of education and awareness programs are very often and should be focused on people who can do certain kinds of things in organizations. The people who can write checks, for example, those are a good group of people to focus this kind of training on, because phishing and manipulation often involves trying to get somebody to send me a thing, a check, a shipment, things like that. There's a good case, a Zoom call. I don't know how many people have heard of this one. Everybody on the call was fake, except for the fulfillment guy. CEO was fake, the purchasing officer was fake, staged and recorded and generated an entire Zoom call. Zoom bombed this guy and said, hey, could you join this call real quick? They went, okay, ship it here. Like $22 million worth of stuff got shipped to a fake warehouse and stolen. The whole call was fake. And that guy's just like, well, you got it, boss. Technical defenses. Okay, so I also put MFA up and a lot of people sigh. Because, like, I know how much we all love MFAs. MFAs, multi-factor authenticators, your Googles, your Gmails, your Microsoft Offices. It is the best of the options right now as far as a technical system that can stop identity theft. And that could include MFAs, no password options, the things that, like are mailing you a code and you click on it and log in. All of those things are getting more and more important as technical controls, as well as phishing training, right? Like most all of us have seen some version of phishing training. It sends me a fake phishing email and I'm supposed to report it, and we're trying to condition people to be skeptical and how to report things. It is critical that we actually still do this, more critical than it has been. And phishing, like there's these sort of two ways to look at it. A lot of people are like, well, yeah, but all it takes is one person to click on that phishing email and they're gonna get the keys to the castle. Then again, you could also say it takes one person to report that phish to the SOC and they'll block the URLs and it won't affect anybody's castle. It's a war of who gets there first, the reporter or the phisher. Our tool in cyber to get people to report it faster than the people who are gonna click it is phishing training. Next, fact checking. And this is fairly obvious given what we've just seen. We have been saying for a long time, trust but verify. That's a cybersecurity principle. We are now saying verify, then trust. Stop trusting so many things. And I hate that. As a human being, I think it's awful. But the fact is, if you think about how much evidence it takes to establish trust, that number, how we quantify evidence, is much bigger today than it was 2 years ago. Used to be, I got you on a Zoom call, I got you on a phone call, I got a text message, we're good, right? But we're not good. Today, I can't trust a voice, a video, a CAPTCHA. I need more evidence to validate that. We have a concept called the human MFA, which is a tricky way to say, hey Jim, did you send me that email? Oh, you did? Hey, remember that beer that we had last year at that baseball game? And if the computer doesn't know how to answer you, the answer is they don't remember that beer they had at that baseball game. It's connecting with people in a way that you actually have like a shared secret before you do a thing. Some organizations have code sheets now, and that seems crazy CIA stuff, but like, you're writing checks and you need a way to out of band validate the identity of the person that you're talking to, you need a system to do it. We need more evidence to establish trust. Okay, I'm gonna shift again. User risks. We already had, I think a show of hands showed 100%, oh, you do have a question, okay.
And so that was my question basically about this shadow AI. That a lot of people will use different AI, put different data, sometimes in like sensitive data of the company.
Yep.
How do we protect company against this?
I'm gonna get there in 3 slides, I promise. Including defining shadow AI, because it's one of my favorite topics. Okay, so I'm gonna go, I'll get right there shortly. So, we're all using this stuff. I work at an organization who's trying to figure out how to manage our risk. I got marketing people running all over, we got sales people, we got students, everybody's Gen AI all the time. We got corporate data, we got brand images to consider. We have to make sure a lot of things are going right. How do we do that? Or how do we at least think about doing that? We start with 3 categories of sort of risk. And it doesn't matter that they're organized this way, they're not in any particular order, they're just a way to kind of think about this. We have acceptable, which simply means follow policies. And trust me, follow policies, they're there for a reason, learn what they are. AI usage should not be done in certain situations. We're gonna talk about policy later, it should define what the situations are, but there are situations that it's just not acceptable to use AI. The AI, Jimmy was mean to me, how do I take disciplinary action as his boss? Those are not good uses of AI. I mean, they might give you some suggestions, but remember there's no judgment in AI, there's no ethics in AI. So we'll get to a little bit more on that in a second. Next, we'll talk about ethical use. We do not want to misuse AI, I'm not really gonna get into that, there's a million ways. We want to appropriately represent AI usage. This is to the shadow AI question. What I mean by that is this. If you work at a place and you're using AI to do your job, it should not be a mystery to your organization that you're using AI to do your job. And I could tell you how many times, okay, so in the early days of this, a couple of years ago, I was walking with our then CEO at the RSA, if anybody's been to RSA, giant cybersecurity show, giant, San Francisco. We were talking about Gen AI. We decided our first policy in generative AI should be nobody can use generative AI. Okay, many organizations' first policy was nobody can use generative AI. 4 months later, we had an AI policy and product committee. We had a policy on how and when to use AI. Because what we found is by saying nobody can use generative AI, is nobody would tell us they were using generative AI. Everybody was still using generative AI, and they were doing what we call shadow AI. And they were doing it without our visibility, without our guidance, without our support, without data classification, without any kind of like recommendations about what tools they should use or ways that they should use them. Everybody was just doing their own thing. That's where shadow AI starts to hurt you. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But when we're using AI, we should represent, and I use the word appropriately represent because it might be different if you're on a software team, than if you're in a marketing team, than you're on a sales team, like whatever your job is, there should be a way to represent that usage. Yes, sir?
I was doing at Wake Tech, so our teachers, have varying policies on AI usage. Majority of those that I have taken with, once they got over the AI scary phase, was I don't care if you use it, just cite your source. And I feel like that was a benefit.
So from,
Limited.
yeah, in that case, that's probably exactly right. Like I don't, there's many different ways to cover it in an educational environment. If you're using it, citing your sources, probably a really good idea. You know, it's also just the culture. This is a cultural question. In cybersecurity, we talk a lot about cybersecurity culture, and it's super important. In this case, banning AI created a culture, okay? Advocating AI. At SANS, every quarter, we have an AI show-off day. Everybody can jump on a Zoom call and show just how smart their smarty pantses are using Gen AI to do A, B, C, and D. Okay, and they all show and they're this, and developers are using cursor, and they're like, look at me, look at that, look at this. And it's great, the cross-pollination. What's really great is the culture of openness about using AI. It's not a dirty secret. I'm not under my desk using it to edit my emails. I'm just using it to edit my emails, and that's okay. That culture allows us to do risk management, allows us to have data, stories about what is and isn't okay, and have some idea about what's going on. Also, there are implications of AI usage I'm going to get to in a second. Lastly, and absolutely not leastly, is the concept of data security as it intersects with LLMs. What I mean by that is nothing that we're doing with generative AI should cause exfiltration of private data to the internet. Nothing. We do not want to make that already pretty large problem any larger. There are a lot of regulations about AI. The European Union's AI Act is in law. Many organizations, like the one I work for, are global, which means there are already a lot of rules about what we can and can't use AI for, and what level of reporting we have to have when we use it for what level of risk. Good example of that, if you're getting admitted to a university in the European Union, AI cannot be used to evaluate those applications. It's against the law in the European Union. There are many laws like that about what you can and can't use it for. And lastly, there are a lot of implications about copyrighted intellectual property. If you decide to sit down and write a book with ChatGPT and you take it down to the US Copyright Office and say, here's my book, nope. So if you're in a business that's generating intellectual property or copyrighted material, and that intellectual property, there are things you have to do to make sure that you don't lose the ability to copyright that information if you're generating it with LLMs. Because in fact, when you generate something with an LLM, what you're essentially doing is assembling other people's stuff into your stuff, and if their stuff was copyrighted, all you're doing is stealing, which is okay unless you're copywriting, apparently. Okay. So the first real risk I'm going to talk about is simple. It's miscommunication, misinterpretation. And if you use ChatGPT a bunch and you use it all day long, it's pretty easy to get pretty loosey-goosey and sarcastic and silly with the way we interact with it. Don't do that. Don't be ambiguous in your language or you're going to get ambiguity in your answer. Also, be aware it is, I don't know if I'd say likely, but certainly possible that the answers this is one of the things they try to screen out, but that the answers are inappropriate, especially inappropriate in the context of what you may be trying to do. The internet, it turns out, has some inappropriate material on it. It could easily come back and be part of an answer that we get. So the mitigation for this is pretty simple. Write strong prompts. Remember, you're not talking to a human, you're talking to a statistical calculator. Help it calculate by giving it meaningful information. Be cautious and review results. I always say this when I get on a slide, if I had a big flag and I could write something on it, one of them would be review results, right? Like these things are good. They're so good, so often, that it's easy to think that they're right all the time. They're so good until they're not good. Yes?
I have a question that relates to this one from one of the previous slides. At the beginning, you had programmers all 126% more productive.
Yes.
How much of that time is that productivity that includes 126 more pages of lines of code? How much of that is actually good to go to plug and play versus?
So let me answer the question I think you're answering, which is if you're using ChatGPT or some other AI LLM to write code, how good is it? That's what you're asking, right? It's pretty good, fantastically good. In fact, I would say today, some dev teams are literally 100 to 200% more productive because of AI-generated code. And people can impugn that number all they want. I have teams of people that write software for a living, and if done right, I'm not saying, hey, write me a giant program that's gonna solve the world and the universe, but if you need functions, you try to find bugs, it writes good code. It does not mean, oh, we're done because the code is done. We still should understand that code. We should also, like in a software development lifecycle, we should peer review that code. We have to run through security checkers and syntactic checkers, but it's really good. The way that programming works is it uses, obviously a symbolic language of software coding to generate programs. It lends itself very, very well. The O3 models, the Anthropic Claude models are just fantastic. One more question in the top.
I just wanted to add to what you said before. When you don't want to give like a wrong answer, you can add to your prompt. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know. This is like some clause you can put into your prompt to get AI not to make up something that's not true.
You can do a lot of things to try to get the AI to do. You can't tell it don't do something that's not true because it doesn't think in terms of that. You can ask it to cite its sources, right? Like that is, like if somebody said, well, what can you do? That's the first thing I do is like say, cite your sources, AI. I want to know where you're getting this from. So if it says, the sky is blue, and it says according to the, international record of sky colors, then at least I know that it's getting that data from someplace, and now I can go and see if that's true or not. But mostly we want to review and externally validate. And I'll tell you this again and again and again, do not ask it if it's right. It will say yes. Do not, and I'm going to tell you a story a little bit later about asking it to verify itself. Yes, sir?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the presentation, I saw you had GitHub Codex, GitHub Copilot
Yes.
as one of them. What you mentioned, I think, is really important because GitHub Copilot, they dumped their Codex algorithm.
Yes.
And they just replaced it with a 4 O rather. And one of the things she said about, can you make sure it's not true? ChatGPT has, when it generates code, you can actually ask it to say, make sure it compiles, and what it does is it actually generates.
Yeah, you can actually, and actually I'll tell you another thing you can do is when it doesn't work, you can dump the errors back in and it'll debug it for you like that. So GitHub Copilot is an integrated IDE solution. If anybody here's a coder and they use like VS Code, you can get a plugin. It's magical. Cursor is the one that all my guys are all going on. Well, I haven't messed with Cursor yet, but these are all ways that those code tools are integrated right into development environments. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Next risk we'll talk about is bias. You guys heard of AI bias? Okay, so when I talk about the sources of the data in the LLMs, right? They are other people's data, they contain other people's biases, there's full of nonsense and conspiracy theories and all that stuff. When they train these models, they have some simple web filtering that they do to try to keep that stuff out, but of course they can't. And what is bias? It's subjective. So when we talk about that, we hope, as I say, that dilution is the solution to pollution. If you're an environmental engineer, what that means is you hope there's enough unpolluted space that when you have a little source of pollution, that it just sort of dissipates and it's gone. In the LLM space, what that means is we hope that there's enough good data to out-statistically signify the bad data. That's what we're hoping, but of course, hope is not a plan, right? Like, that is true when it's true, until it isn't true, and then we end up with a biased answer. And by the way, a biased answer is not that weird and hard to conceive of. Here's a simple example. I asked Google Gemini to write me a single narrative paragraph about a nurse. It includes 3 pictures. It gave me these 3 pictures, and it gave me this paragraph. This is not a moment where I'm going to talk about being woke or not woke or whatever. All I'm saying is, this is what came back. There's 3 pictures of women and a paragraph about a woman.
Yeah, but your prompt was not specific. You could have added to your prompt that you
All I said is write me a single narrative paragraph about a nurse.
but you could specify
I'm getting there, Okay, the point is, this could be considered biased, it could be considered accurate, it depends on your point of reference, but in many ways, this would be considered gender biased. If I do change my prompt to something like this, describe the responsibilities and skills of a professional nurse in a modern healthcare setting, there's enough language to get it to respond with something more like a professional nurse in a modern healthcare setting is a highly trained and skilled individual regardless of gender and so on and such forth. Now, I don't know which answer you prefer, which one's better, it kind of depends on what you're doing and what you're doing it for, but that's an example of a bias based on the data set. So if you're worried that like Sam Altman's in his ivory tower somewhere trying to get us to think about nurses a certain way, he's not. When they train these models based on data, it has bias, period, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're doing it with, that bias could show up. So, remember how these things work. Statistics and the internet. Remember that AI actually aims to please. Okay, and I don't mean like it's sentient. What I mean is, if I lead it and I say, tell me why dogs are better than cats, it's going to tell me why dogs are better than cats. That seed that I'm planting in that prompt is going to expand. It's going to pick up the data that reinforces that prompt, and it's going to tell me exactly why dogs are better than cats. If I don't want that, unfortunately too many people do want that kind of an answer, but if I don't want that, what I could do is say something like, compare and contrast the benefits and challenges of having a dog versus having a cat. And let it not start with a bias, because it is certainly going to reinforce one if we start with one. Always, again, audit our results, this time for bias. Let's put on our bias detectors and take a look at those results. Learn and use good prompt engineering and consider using multiple different prompts to get the answer out. That's the best way to get rid of bias. Yes, sir?
So there are multiple LLMs available specifically for different industries and different use cases. In some cases, many choices. Are there any standards or is there industry leading towards validating the LLMs itself or knowing some ratings around it to make sure you're using the right one?
Yes and no. So there are some ways that people have developed to validate the accuracy of responses from the LLM, but they're difficult because the LLMs themselves are containing bias, for example, so they are about consistency, not correctness, if that makes any kind of sense. Do you have a question up there?
Yeah, in the previous example that you showed, if you wouldn't mind backing up just a second, regardless of gender is really curious. Why, if you ask for any other position, why would it say we didn't say anything about gender. Nothing in that prompt says anything about gender. Nothing in the answer should suggest anything about it. If we said for a lawyer, would it say regardless of gender? So in some way, it's actually acknowledging bias by trying to be anti-bias. That's very curious.
It's not trying to be anything.
I'm sorry,
Right.
in some way it is acknowledging bias by adding that.
Absolutely.
Curious, very curious.
It's very, very curious.
Because if it were a lawyer, a computer scientist, it wouldn't say it.
Let me give you, if you'll allow me, a side story, a little experiment that I did. I asked ChatGPT to make me a picture of Fortune 500, Fortune 100 CEO. Okay? Seems straightforward. Anybody want to guess what a Fortune 500 CEO average looks like? Describe. Anyone?
Oh, middle-aged white man.
45 to 55-year-old white male. That describes about 90% of the Fortune 500 CEOs. The picture I got back was of a 35-year-old Asian female. Anybody want to guess why? Well, the obvious answer, by the way, is because that's the picture that's mostly associated with how the internet has reported on Fortune 500 CEOs. So what you're seeing, at least my theory on what we're seeing, is that when media puts up imagery associated with Fortune 500 CEOs, they're bias compensating by trying to be diverse, right? They're trying to show a diverse cast of characters, They know they're gonna get in trouble if all they put up are 50-year-old white men, so they put up a lot of pictures of the opposite of that, or some version that isn't that. And then the LLM sees that and it thinks it's truth, which all contributes to the statement, carefully audit your answers for bias. One more question, then we gotta move on. Go ahead.
With regard to the bias part of this conversation, this is twofold. One is the training of the languages itself to figure out if, when we look around, we recognize speech based on tonality of that speech or skin tone for pictures when you're looking at for training of the language. But in terms of bias that comes out from many of these LLMs, is that it's video data that we have on the internet, and that internet data is going to reflect what society has today, many of which is biased because of where we have ended with this whole bit of socioeconomic breakup. But in terms of what data is present, it's going to be uploaded by everyone in this room. And people in this room are going to have their own slants to that information, and the larger number of us who have that slant is going to be influencing these.
Yes, the only thing that I'll tell you is you're competing with 1.74 trillion tokens. That bias in that LLM is going to take a long time to change. Not forever, but it is what it is. Okay, I'm moving on. Now, data security, privacy. We think about LLMs in two modes. We call open and closed, call public and private, call them whatever you want. They're characterized by acting in two different ways. There are LLMs that remember every single thing that you put into them, okay? You put in a document and say, summarize this document, it goes in, it ends up getting encoded, it's put into the LLM. It is remembered by that LLM. Your prompt, tell me about this, do that, generate a picture, remembered by the LLM. Whether you thumbs up, thumbs down, keep or reprompt the answer, kept track of by the LLM. Or they don't, they're private. They don't remember your data. Your data is transient. It goes in and comes out and it doesn't remember anything about it. All, to my knowledge, of these LLM tools, the ChatGPTs, the Google Geminis, IBM Watson, Anthropic Claude, operate in both modes. They have a regular mode and they have a private mode. The default is the regular mode. The switch, toggle button, radio button, whatever it is that you have to check is somewhere, but most people don't know to check it. This, of course, is problematic if you put in any kind of data that you don't want learned by an LLM. Other people can come along, and this is actually a certain kind of an attack, it's a data mining attack, or they just inadvertently stumble on that data, and then that data is their data. Lastly, remember AI tools are just SaaS software in most all cases, not always, but mostly. So all these tools are software running in the cloud somewhere. If you're at an organization and you want to use one, it's got to go through a security review. At our organization, it also has to go through an AI review to see if it's appropriate use and appropriate risk management for that piece of software. So both a security review and an AI review. Here's a little example of how that happens. So here's somebody who's putting data through an LLM. Don't worry about anything but this big data set. Because if that person is putting in any kind of private financial information, personal information, what have you, and that is one of those their learning systems, which all of them are if they're not configured not to be, then what happens is as that data transits the system, that PII is now in the LLM. So some other person comes along, obviously the bad guy, and mines that data out of the LLM, discovers it by accident, and now that data is their data. And by the way, the mistake is made when that white hat dude put private data into a learning system, not when the black hat dude found it. That data is exfiltrated at that point, it's compromised. So, never, ever, ever put private data in a learning system. I think that's kind of a no-duh, kind of a don't do it. But we have to train people not to do it. We actually buy, at SANS, an enterprise license to ChatGPT which gives us corporate controls over whether it learns or doesn't. So everybody logs into their corporate ChatGPT, it doesn't learn anything from anybody.
But can you really trust that? Or even if you say like don't learn my data and in 5 years time they will say like, oops, we made a mistake.
You know, I get this question a lot. So who here knows what a SOC 2 certification is for an enterprise piece of software, okay? SOC 2 certification is I hire an auditor, they do both a controls audit and they do a security audit, and they look for evidence and they review my organization, they tell me you're secure. And now I tell my customers we're secure. We have a SOC 2 certification or ISO certifications of many different ways we could do this. Every one of these LLMs is SOC 2 certified. Now you can choose not to trust them, you can choose to trust them, but I use 50 different SaaS applications and I trust that their SOC 2 certification is valid and that Salesforce isn't stealing my data and ServiceNow is not stealing my data and that Microsoft isn't stealing my data. And we are all making those choices every single day already. I'm not saying you should make this choice, but I'm saying it's the same choice with the same validation, with the same certifications as those choices. Yes, sir?
Are there any benefits to running a local hosted instance of ChatGPT or some variation of Obama or something?
Sure. Your data is private for sure. You're trading cost and efficacy, right? Like the number one reason people use LLMs is because they're awesome. The local models aren't awesome. They're okay, right? Like so for purposes they can be good, but if you're trying to generate something amazing, it's pretty hard with a local model. They're also computationally difficult, meaning they're hard to get chips. It's hard to, you know, like it's not easy to run and support those. Yes, sir?
There's been some progress. I think neural cleansing that is we're almost at the edge. So it's if you accidentally gave AI models private data, it's possible for some weak companies
well,
to go into.
I don't know that I would say it's possible today. Right now, if you put private data into ChatGPT and you try to figure out a way to get it back out, it is not going to back out. It is embedded, it's built into tokens, and it's not in an LLM. In a way, once things go in and they get tokenized and they get processed in the LLM, we can't remove them. They are encoded in a way that you can't find them, they're not contiguous anymore, they're just there.
The suggestion is that data is exfiltrated within 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Within 2 minutes, that data is in the hands of that data.
And the other thing that's interesting about this, we think we have control over this to a degree because we can regulate ChatGPT and we can write policies, but the opposite, the thing that actually scares me the most isn't this stuff. It's things like this. So about 6 months ago, our CEO, Dennis Kirby, called me up. He said, hey Dan, so I was analyzing this financial document. It was in a piece of software and all of a sudden a box popped up and said, would you like to analyze this with AI? And I said, what are you talking about? Do not do, because it was a super secret document, whatever CEOs do. And I said, what terrible software are you using that's all of a sudden asking you to use AI? And he said, yeah, it's Acrobat, right? Like the software everybody has on every device that they own in the middle of the night did the thing that actually we security professionals have been telling them to do for it updated itself, but it didn't update itself to security patch. It updated AI functionality into the application, and I suppose somebody somewhere got an update to their end user license agreement in their inbox that they didn't read or something, but like that functionality just appeared. There was no security review. I have no idea what happens or what we're agreeing to when we do click yes, I want to try that AI box. And if you think that's happening only in Acrobat, I can't think of a piece of software that's not actually kind of happening to. It's happening everywhere. So again, never put PII in. Make sure we're following both AI standards and security standards. And if we're building integrations, be really careful, right? Like, just because integrations, things like the transcription thing that I was talking about, the quiz generations, those actually end up being sort of unsupervised, right? And we want to make sure that the data classification of what we're putting through those integrations is consistent, so all of a sudden we're not pumping different data class through those integrations. Okay, so the last one I'll talk about is called over-reliance. This is very easy to understand. And if you don't understand, just ask ChatGPT and it'll tell you what to understand. And that's actually kind of the problem. It is very easy, if you use this stuff all the time, to start doing things that are beyond our capability to understand, is it right or not? You might think this is crazy, it happens every single day. Especially like you get a technical person writing us a piece of software or building a product. You get a marketing person who needs a marketing piece about that product. They take the product description, they feed it into ChatGPT or Google Gemini, they say, write me a marketing description, what's the value proposition, blah, blah, blah. It spits out a bunch of stuff, the marketing person goes, wow, this is awesome. The value of this product is written right here and I can put it on our webpage and we're good to go. But if they don't understand what the actual product is or how it works or what it does, it's very easy for them to take that information and put it up and end up looking really dumb. AI will always sound confident. These things don't hem and haw, they're not like, oh no, I think the answer. They're like, the answer is this, that's the answer. Are you sure that's the answer? Yes, that's the answer. Stop asking. They're very confident. I'll tell you a cool story. 2.5 years ago, somebody was on a United Airlines flight where I spent an awful lot of time, and they got nailed by a drink cart. I don't know how many drink cart wounds there have been in this room, but if you fly enough, sooner or later you're getting hit with a drink cart. It hurts. They got back to their house in New York, they got really mad, they hired a lawyer, they sued United Airlines over the drink cart incident, they went to court. You can probably guess where this is headed. I'm going to say that. The lawyer for the defendant took the evidence, the precedents, the court precedents that were filed by the plaintiff's lawyer and started digging through them or doing, I don't know, whatever lawyers do, $500 an hour, and digging. The precedents didn't make sense, right? So they end up in the judge's chambers, people are yelling at each other and all that. Finally, the lawyer for the plaintiff admitted that they used a brand new tool called ChatGPT, and they asked it to generate case law associated with drink carts and airlines or whatever, and it did exactly what they asked him to, generate a case law. And he asked it, is this real case law? Having recently synthesized this case law, of course it said it was. This is not a joke. This guy got fired. The case was dismissed. He almost got disbarred for manufacturing evidence. But nobody really quite knew, this was so new at the time, he didn't get disbarred. But that's exactly the kind of stuff that we're talking about with overconfidence. If you can't tell what's coming out is correct, you need to find somebody who can. We talk in AI about HITL, human in the loop. We say that kind of stuff all the time, HITL. This is QHITL, qualified human in the loop. This happens all the time. We do this, like, I can't even tell you, like every time we QA a thing, we need a subject matter expert to come in and make sure that that thing is on point. Study the output, and again, don't ask AI to validate itself, although you can unuse yourself if you'd like to. Yes?
Could you use ChatGPT and then Gemini to verify ChatGPT or vice versa?
100%. And then verify the results with somebody who knows what's going on. But yes, actually multiple prompts and multiple systems and maybe a good old Google search. Like the new models of OpenAI, I don't know if anybody's messed around with their deep research model. It's pretty badass, pardon my French. It actually cites sources and references that you can click on and check and follow up. But really, this concept of explainable and trustworthy AI is a whole thing. The fact is, we don't really know how it gets from point A to point B. I mean, we conceptually know, but we can't trace it out. Not like if I pull out a calculator and I go 1 + 1 equals, some engineer in Texas can tell me exactly why it's going to say 2, exactly over and over again why it says 2. LLMs are mysterious a little bit. They don't always tell us the right answer, and we can't always discern how they got from point A to point B. Okay, so policy. I'm not going to talk a lot about policy because I think policy is a little bit boring, but I will tell you policy in the AI space is really useful because there are so many ambiguous rules around AI usage. So if you're a student or you're an employee or you're a policy writer, your AI policy has, you're almost obligated. If you say be ethical, somebody gets to ask, well, what does that mean? What does ethical mean? Can I use this to discipline my employees or hire my employees or fire my employees? Can I use it to write marketing material? Can I use it to write code? All of those kinds of things should be defined in a policy somewhere. If it isn't, I don't know, tell somebody to write a better policy. Allowed and disallowed activity. As I said before, we don't use AI for, I think I said, for legal advice. We have a lawyer to give us legal advice. And actually, if our lawyer wants to use ChatGPT, she can, because she's a lawyer. But if I need to know about tort law in New Jersey, I certainly have no business asking ChatGPT. I would never know if it's right or wrong. So it's disallowed. Ethical usage frameworks, transparency requirements. What do we as an organization mean by transparency? And it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. It might mean something different to marketing than it does to sales, than it does to software engineering. But we should know what the expectation is on people to report their AI usage or to signify it or however they're going to do it. Tool approval standards, training requirements. We strongly recommend, and this isn't just because we sell training, honestly, it really isn't. We strongly recommend that end users be trained on many of these concepts. Maybe not, for 90 minutes a year, but they should be trained on bias, they should be trained on over-reliance, they should be trained on the fact that AI can be wrong, things like that, at least once a year. Okay, the last thing I'll say is that's cool, is most organizations are actually optimizing for the adoption of AI. I've been in security a long time, which I have. A lot of policy is very shut it down, stop, don't do that, it's the Department of No. AI has actually got probably the most favorable policy documents for promotion of speedy adoption with reasonable risk management. Okay, so if you've heard of DeepSeek, everybody heard of DeepSeek? My answer, don't seek. Okay? I'm not saying that because I don't, A for effort. It has already known that everything that goes in is Chinese property. If you install these applications on your phones, it will do everything it can to take all of that data. Everything you put in is learning regardless of what it says, on and on and on. I hope they don't have a SOC 2 certification. These municipalities, governments, the United States government it's already banned in a bunch of states. There are whole countries that have banned it. Every cybersecurity company who, they like make their name by trying to pen test things. 100 tests in a row, cybersecurity tests have failed. Simple, rudimentary, old tech. There's been no effort made to secure it. There's no mystery that it's tracking people. You can see it's tracking evidence followed across the internet by many cybersecurity firms. It's really bad news. And I'm a huge advocate for AI and for technology, but this one is very bad. Okay. Yes.
Is there credible evidence to support the idea that a lot of there are applications that are masquerading as AI applications that are actually just malware, that are, stealing your data, really just kind of putting up a front?
Specifically,
valid answers, but
I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll answer it a slightly different way, right? Like, we're all pretty quick to install applications. We're all pretty unconcerned. So we're trusting 2 people to keep us safe in the application space, especially with apps on phones. We are trusting Google through its Android store, and we're trusting Apple through its App Store. I don't know if we should or shouldn't trust them, but that's who we're trusting. And it's not just because they're AI applications, they're just a candy. Just be really careful about which band you get into, I guess. It is very dangerous to install apps to begin with. The too good to be true AI apps aren't really any different than, whatever the TikTok replacement is going to be. One more question?
So when you say don't seek DeepSeek, are you referring to the DeepSeek application service, or are you referring to the DeepSeek open source model?
I didn't even want to Google it, to be honest. So if it is having anything to do with its models, its software, its applications, its web pages, I wouldn't go near it. It is such a known data stealer. It makes TikTok look like an innocent, like, you know, it is super, super bad. Okay, we're gonna move on. Yep, okay.
One question, back early in the talk, you talked about the engine basically being a probability engine.
Yep.
And it's looking at the different probabilities and taking essentially the best one. Is that tracked within the LLM, basically multiplying those together and determining how likely the probability of the answer actually being legitimate or viable?
There's no concept of viability, I guess, but like.
But there is the concept of probability.
Probability, yes.
And do those get, like, say, tracked to the extent that you look at a guidance of how much probability the answer actually?
No. When they're training the models, they're constantly submitting and getting the answer back, and they're adjusting those model weights. That's actually, if you want to know the most valuable thing, totally most valuable thing to OpenAI is their model weights. Because those are the things that they've been adjusting and adjusting and adjusting and adjusting to get the predictions of the LLM to match the reality of the input data. And they do, this is the thing that costs $100 million, right? Like, those model weights are gold, and they're never going to tell you what they are, because they're gold. Okay, so don't seek DeepSeek. I threw this up here because our sales guy said he'd buy me dinner if I did. These are a bunch of courses. These are a bunch of courses that we have coming up. We at SANS have about 90 courses. They cover every kind of cybersecurity thing that you could ever imagine. They are pretty awesome. These are upcoming ones. Even right now, and if you're in cyber, don't be surprised that AI is showing up there too, right? Like, so every different, you know, if you're working in a SOC, if you're working as a DFIR person, if you're working as a red team or blue team or purple team, or all of those tool sets are starting to include some AI kit. And there's a new field of securing AI itself, which isn't the same thing. Like, how do we build RAG architectures and LLMs, and how do we put in security features to keep applications safe and defeat prompt engineering and model poisoning and all those kinds of things. That's a whole thing. There's a whole bunch of courses coming up. Robert, who's in the back, is from Charlotte? Raleigh. Sorry. I'm from Michigan. You're lucky I got the state. Right? There's a conference down here, a SANS conference, yes, September 15th.
The week of September 15th, we're having a training event in Raleigh.
Yeah. So, and some of these courses will be done by then, some won't. But this is becoming obviously a centerpiece of cybersecurity, just like it is a centerpiece of everything else. That's coming up. Lastly, just a little conclusion. Of course, accountability is the thing, right? We do not have the ability to shift accountability for a problem that we create, a crappy product that we make, to the AI. The AI made me do it. That's not a thing. And I can tell you, I work in a real job in the real world, and I'm responsible for the things I do. And the more focused we can keep people on the fact that they're accountable for their work products, the more carefully they're going to follow policies and have good practices in creating good work products. Always verify output. I might have mentioned that once or twice. Understand and don't over-rely. You will, I promise, but try not to too much. Transparent usage, and always be careful about data security. This is my contact information if anybody wants to hit me up on LinkedIn. I love it. I love to talk about this stuff. I'll connect with you and we can meet up. Well,
okay,
last question.
One question.
Well, AI aiming to please is in reference to the fact that you can cause it to move in a biased direction by giving it biased input.
If I was 9 years old and write something to, like this again, thing from a way of prayer, they still try to penetrate through that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. We're trying to finish up. Let's talk out in the hallway. I'm happy to talk about it.
So I'm sure there is still a lot of food out there, please, and there are a lot of to-go boxes there, 35 of them. Please take food home. We don't want to take that back. And there are some Ziploc bags as well. Please take home the food if you can. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
I think we have one question. Do you want to, whom do you want to give the bot back?
Oh, yes. Next three, hold on. I forgot to get these bags away. However, I'm going to issue my judgment. Hold on. Hold on. Well, there's no stairs over here, so I'm gonna break my neck down.